أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم. مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
ربنا علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وصلي اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد. So, our topic today revolves around this question. Have you ever wondered why God sent us his final eternal message in an Arabi tongue, بلسان عربي? The answer is in the word itself, which is what? Arabi. The word Arabi. What is so special about Arabi? Today we shall discover the meaning and importance of Arabi, a few highlights from its history through time and place. We shall recover lost concepts, recognize a few Arabic words in European languages, and we shall marvel at the meaning of sounds. So sit comfortably, you're in for a long ride. So the meaning of Arabi as opposed to Arabic is not about ethnic identity. It's not about something Arabian. It's not about race, and it's not about ethnicity. The Quran has no race, has no ethnicity, but it is Arabi in and of itself. So what does that mean? Well, it means that it is unmatched in timeless, self-explanatory eloquence, which is the real meaning of Araba. And it delivers its original meaning through its context and its language to, who do you think the Quran would deliver its meaning to? The Qari. So Qari al-Quran, the one who approaches the Quran with the Iqra principle, which is actually the way of Iqra, which is the first command ever given to the Prophet, peace upon him, Iqra. When you do that, حين تقرأ كتاب الله, حين تقرأ كتاب الله, that at that time you are the Qari and Kitab Allah is the Quran. So you would be activating Iqra. So what is it that's so special about Arabi? There are 10 direct references to the Quran being Arabi. In Surah Yusuf 12:2, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا, we have sent it down a Arabi Quran. In Surah Taha 20:113, وَكَذَلِكَ أَنزَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا. In Surah Al-Zumar 39:28, قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا. In Surah Fussilat 41:3, كتاب, a compilation, فصلت آياته قرآنا عربيا. So it's a compilation, the signs of which have been brought out بالتفصيل, in detail, as Arabi Quran. So it is a compilation when it's on your shelf. But once you become a qari of it, it is Quran. كتاب فصلت آياته قرآنا عربيا لقوم يعلمون. رب العالمين علم القرآن, right? So people who are actually approaching it, wanting to learn from it, they become qari, and the Quran is Arabi to them. That's in Surah Fussilat 41:3. In Surah Ash-Shura 42, وَلَوْ جَعَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا أَعْجَمِيًّا لَقَالُوا لَوْلَا فُصِّلَتْ آيَاتُهُ. They would have asked for it to be in detail if it had been sent in any other tongue. It would not have been clear. People would have asked for it to be in detail. And in Surah Ash-Shura 7, وكذلك أوحينا إليك قرآنا عربيا. The Quran itself is called Arabi, if you see what I mean. It's not in Arabic. It is Arabi in and of itself. And of course, in Surah Al-Zukhruf 43:3. So here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 direct references to the Quran being Arabi. And then you have 3 to the Arabi tongue, al-lisan al-Arab. And it's always, subhanallah, in Surah Al-Nahl 16:103 and Surah Al-Shu'ara 26:195, it is called lisan Arabi mubin, a clear and clarifying Arabi tongue. Subhanallah. In Surah Al-Ahqaf 46:12 is also called lisan Arabiyan. And then in Surah Al-Ra'd 13:37, it is called hukman Arabiyan, an Arabi ordinance, meaning that the hukm of it, the ordinance of it, is very clear and self-expressive and eloquent, which is the meaning of the word Arabi. So let us just look back at the whole structure of the way we interact with the Quran. Now, we do know that there have been efforts to distance Muslims from the Quran. And we do know that it is happening even as we speak. Muslims are becoming distanced from the Quran, but there are others, of course, who are coming closer. So it's always a give and take. But the Quran will never be absent from the lives of Muslims. It will never be absent. And those who embrace Islam will continue to increase. The numbers of those who embrace Islam will continue to increase. But there's something very important to remember here, which is the importance of Arabi. In the absence of showcasing the Quran's timeless and raceless and depth of meaning in its Arabi, you see, if we don't know the Arabi of it, much of its wisdom, its wonders of pre-scientific knowledge, the knowledge which is actually super scientific, I'm going to say, maybe not even pre-scientific, because science, changes with time. It evolves. So maybe it's actually super scientific knowledge. Much of the Quran's wisdom, its super scientific knowledge, and its peace will be missed. There is a lot in the Quran which will be missed if we do not know its Arabi. Arabi is very important. So I'm just going to give you an example or two. So let's give you an example related to scientific knowledge. And as I said, it's super scientific knowledge, because before something was discovered or seen to be a fact, before that, the Quran had spoken of it. But of course, we didn't understand because we weren't at that level yet. And there's a lot in the Quran which we will come to know as humanity. Which we as humanity will come to know as we progress. There's a lot in the Quran that's like that. So it's super scientific. So I'm just going to give you an example here about something which is like the scientific knowledge, which you might say, is it true, Randa, that you discovered this? Is it possible you're not a scientist? Is it true that you discovered this? I think I did. I'm not sure anybody else did. But anybody who would look at the lexicon in detail would discover it. It's there in the lexicon, but all you need to do is to look for it. And that is in what I'm going to tell you shortly. I won't give it away right now. But let me just tell you what happened, the background. Somebody called the Imam of the Arabi language. His name is Ibn Jinni. He lived from 941 to 1002 of the Common Era. He said that the Arabi language retains the original association of human sound to meaning. Before symbolic language evolved, before humans started the bashar, probably, not al-insan, because al-insan, which is Adam, was given the what? Al-asma'a kullaha. Before that, the bashar, before symbolic language evolved, earliest human communication, bashari communication, consisted of uttered sounds. So they would say a sound, and that sound would mean something to them, okay? Each sound indicating a distinct meaning. And that association which we're talking about can still be found in the Arabi letters and sounds as they relate to meaning. So I'm going to give you an example, which many of you have heard before, which is the word gharaqa, right? So we know that gharaqa is made of gha and ra and qa. We're not going to say ghain and ra and qaf, because when we say qaf, that's three sounds, qa and a and if. So we're talking sounds. We're not talking letters here, okay? It's about sounds. So gharaqa is gha and ra and qa, right? So many of you have heard this from me before, that gha always signifies what? Something that is disappearing. And we know that from words such as ghaim, which is the clouds, ghafla, ghiyab, which is actually disappearance, or not being there, absence of something. So the gha indicates what? Disappearance. The ra, as we know, and it has to do also with where it is in the throat, where that sound comes from in the throat. Gha is here. Qa is deeper, so I'll show you in a moment. So gha is about disappearance. Ra, because you cannot say ra unless you actually repeat the ra many times. Nobody can actually say one ra. Once you say ra, you're saying it several times. So ra means repetition, okay? And qa means al-qa'r, the core. It's the deep sound in your throat. Qa. It's the deepest sound. So gharaqa, those who know Arabic know what it means, but if you don't, gharaqa is something disappearing, gha, ra, continuing to disappear, qa, until it reaches the core or the base, which is about drowning. Gharaqa in Arabic means to drown. So that's just giving you one meaning of sounds. Another one, which also many of you know, and I've spoken of that before, which is the meaning of the sound ma and the meaning of the sound a. Now, ma is always ad-dam wal-lam, because that's when your lips come together. So it means coming together. A is the only sound which reverberates or comes back as an echo. So it is about return, coming back to where it started and returning. So that is why every baby on earth says ma, which means come together, ma, right? Dam and lam, embracing, coming together, ma. And lam means also to come together. So every baby on earth doesn't know why they say that, and they don't do it. They do it instinctively. Nobody does it being told to say it that way. The way they learn language later. No, it's not that way. It's instinctive. It's something inside us that we say ma. So ma is about come back and gather me to you. Come back, return, and gather me to you. Come back and embrace me. Come back and embrace me, ma. And somebody asked me once, okay, what is baba? Because the first thing you say is mama, and the second thing you say is baba. So what is baba? Actually, it's interesting because ba is according to Ibn Jinni, it is nihayat al-dam wal-lam. So after the togetherness of dam and lam coming together and holding and returning, then it is baba. Nihayat al-dam wal-lam. So when you're done with your mama, you've finished your suckling, you're not a baby anymore, you don't need the milk anymore. What do? You want your baba to take you out walking, to take you out. Ba, nihayat al-dam wal-lam. It's the end of dam and lam. It's the end of the togetherness of mama. And it's interesting because we do know something which goes out and comes back. Return, right? Is return. So goes out and comes back and goes out and comes back. What is it in Arabic? Bab. Bab is a door. Bab is a door, going out and coming back and forth. Subhanallah. So I'm just showing you that the Arabic language retains the original association of sound and meaning. right? So that is why when I read the ayah in Surah Al-Shams that says, وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا طَحَاهَا, I couldn't accept what the exegetes have said, mufassirin, when they said طَحَاهَا أي دَحَاهَا, meaning that ta with the ta is the same as dal, daha. In other ayahs, it speaks about وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ دَحَاهَا. And here it says وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا طَحَاهَا. So طَحَاهَا and دَحَاهَا cannot be exactly the same meaning, but the exegetes have all said that dahaha means to spread it out, and tahaha is the same meaning that Allah spread the earth out. So the ayat starts, Surah Shams, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, by the sun and its rising, وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا, by the moon as it follows, وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا, by the daytime as it makes apparent, وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا, by the nighttime as it conceals, right? And then وَالسَّمَاءِ وَمَا بَنَاهَا وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا طَحَاهَا. Now we're talking about the exalted expanse, وَالسَّمَاء, and what constructed it, right? وَمَا بَنَاهَا وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا طَحَاهَا. And the earth and what? Spread it out? No, that's dahaha. Here it's tahaha. You're talking about the exalted expanse. And the earth and what? So I looked it up and I found out that the first explanation they gave was tahaha is probably the same as dahaha. But then he said, and there are Arabs who say, okay, وَيَقُولُ قَوْمٌ, or somebody who says, meaning, of course, the Badu or the Arabs, that النسور الطواحي, the eagles who are called tawahi, are the eagles that encircle the cadaver, or the cadaver, as I don't know how you want to pronounce it, which is what? Which is the dead body in the desert. They would see it. They would see the eagles, what? Orbiting around it, encircling the cadaver. Okay, so now we know the meaning of tahaha, because although the exegetes and even the lexicographer did not actually put it as the first meaning, he said that there are people who say, and that's what it means. So what it means is by the exalted expanse and what constructed it, by the earth and what put it in orbit. Subhanak ya Rab. Subhanak ya Rab. So this is something which is recovered because of the what? Of the lexicon. And this is the Arabi, which I'm talking about. You will discover, you will recover, you will be amazed, you will be awed, you will be enthralled. You will live a new life by coming close to the Quran in its Arabi and realizing the beauty, the majesty, the wonder of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, which we won't get, of course, in English, unless somebody explains it. And we will not get even in Arabic if we do not look it up through context and the language, the Arabic language. So this is something I wanted to tell you. Another example, but this time it's scary because it's related to peace and war and to how people have read this ayah. So we have an ayah which is in Surah Al-Anfal, Surah 867. ما كان لنبي أن يكون له أسرى حتى يثخن في الأرض. It is not for a prophet to have captives until he has يثخن في الأرض. The meaning has been explained by Arab exegetes actually as المبالغة في القتل, that you should not have captives until you have actually killed as many of the enemy as you can. Kill them before you take any captives. That's the interpretation which is in most Arabic exegesis. Luckily in the English, I've looked through the English explanations and I haven't found that as common as in the Arabi exegesis. So when you look at the word yuthkhin in the lexicon also, you do find the first meaning as qatl. You do find it. But then, again, the lexicographer, subhanallah, because it's one of the earliest lexicographers, Ibn Faris, and he has to put everything that has been said about it, right? And other other lexicographers don't do that because they come later and they just repeat what they know. But he puts what he heard because he's earlier than they are and he's closer to the time of the Risala. And so what he says is that some people have said that this is actually about disarming the captives. Disarming the captives. And that is so beautiful because it makes sense also when you look at the other ayahs, it makes complete sense. Look at this ayah. Surah Muhammad 47:4. Okay. فإذا لقيتم الذين كفروا فضرب الرقاب. Therefore, when you come up against those who denied, then the striking or the falling upon or striking upon the necks. Okay. حتى إذا أثخنتموهم, until when you have أثخنتموهم, okay, فشدوا الوثاق, then tighten the bond. فإما منا بعد وإما فداء حتى تضع الحرب أوزارها. Tighten the bond or tighten the ropes, after which there is either generosity or ransom until the war releases its burden. So when you come upon those who denied, then the striking or the falling upon the necks, until when you have disarmed them, tighten the ropes, after which there's either generosity or ransom, meaning either you let them go away free or you take fida, until ransom, until the war has released its burden. Okay, now listen to that. That makes sense. That you actually disarm them, right? But the problem is when you've translated as to and tukthir al-qatl, what would it mean to tighten the bond? What bond? You've killed them already. What rope? And then what generosity? And then what ransom? And then it doesn't say even you do that. When you come upon against those who denied, then the striking or the falling upon the necks, until when you have disarmed them. So you see, tighten the bond. So I'm just trying to show you that Arabi gives you a different meaning than what exegetes have said. Just look at it, see what the lexicographers say, because the exegetes, they are making the tafsir according to their time. And if they don't go back to the meaning of the word, sometimes they tell you the meaning, which is what common at that time. Of course, I'm not generalizing. There's many exegesis, and I'm just telling you about Az-Zamakhshari, whom I usually really like his tafsir. But here he was the one who said, قال الزمخشري أثخنتموهم تعني أكثرتم قتلهم وأغلظتموه من الشيء الثخين وهو الغليظ أو أثقلتموهم بالقتل والجراح. So he is giving both. He's giving both, but still it is more about what? About really killing. So Arabi, go back to the lexicon, go back to what the Arabi means and look at all because the lexicon gives you more than one way of understanding it, right? It gives you that, and it says, but some Arab have said. So look at what some Arab have said, because that's what the Bedou are saying, and maybe that's the correct one. Wallahu a'lam. And of course, there are other ayahs. We said language and context, right? So you cannot understand the Quran just through language. You have to also look at its context. And then what do we have? An ayah which tells us in Surah Al-Insan, وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. And they feed the food despite its love or for the love of God, the poverty-stricken, incapacitated, and miskeen, miskeenan wa yatiman, and the orphan, wa asira, and the captive. So I mean, if you are feeding the captive and you are taking care of his health, how could it be that ayah is not about disarming, right? Because in the lexicon, it says to disarm being one of the meanings of the word ثخنة. One of the meanings of the word ثخنة is to disarm. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you do not know Arabi, you might veer away from the peace and the love and the beauty and the majesty and the super scientific meanings of the Quran. So here is what Ibn Faris says. He says, ثخن يدل على رزانة الشيء في ثقل. تقول ثخن الشيء والرجل الحليم الرزين والثوب المكتنز من جودة نسجه هو ثخين وقد أثخنته أي أثقلته, I made it heavy. It's all about heaviness. And then he says قال تعالى حتى يثخن في الأرض وذلك أن القتيل قد أثقل, meaning that the dead person is heavy. That's what he says. But then he says وقال قوم يقال للأعزل الذي لا سلاح معه ثخين. It is said of the person who is disarmed and has no weapon, ثخين. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about. Okay. So we have a historian, he was born in 1942, so he's still living with us today, Ahmad Yusuf Dawood. He compiled a treasure trove of information in his many books on early Syrian history and ancient Arabia. He detailed the culture and the languages, and he showed us how a spoken word would traverse ethnicities at a time when many communities were what? Mutually intelligible. This is what we don't understand, that there was a time before even the languages of Europe evolved, like English, French, Spanish, whatever other languages in Europe evolved, that there was a time when they were mutually intelligible, meaning that one person from one country could understand another because they had words that were very, very similar and they used it in a very similar way, mutually intelligible. So he says that the roots of the Arabic language, he named the Assyriac and the Phoenician languages, he called them Old Arabic, العربية القديمة. And he illustrated their impact upon world languages, including Greek and Latin. And he showed us how nouns, even later on, they became feminine just by adding what is known in Arabic as ta' al-ta'nith, the ta' of ta'nith. So in Arabic, we put the ta' to show femininity. And here he shows us that, for example, Antoine would become Antoinette, George would become Georgette, and that the ta' is ta' al-ta'nith, which is in Old Arabic. So subhanAllah, languages, there was a time when languages were what? Were mutually intelligible, and there was a time when they were all like blending together until they became separate languages later on. We know that the French scientist Pierre Rossi, you've heard me speak about him before, he died in 2002, he was born in 1920. He is dubbed the historian of the Arab world, and he says in his book, The True History of the Arabs, that Western linguists, listen to this, Western linguists purposefully obscured the relationship of Greek civilization to its mother civilization, ancient Arabia, that they purposefully obscured this relationship. He says the Greek language is Arabic in as much as the Arabic is Greek. In this, there is little difference. The Greek language is no more than a language of transmission because the fundamental cultural, scientific, and religious heritage was provided to us by the Arabs. We should not reverse these positions, rendering the Greeks, who were no more than heirs, rendering them the fathers of their spiritual ancestors, the Arabs. To this end, we beg the pardon of distinguished scholars, for the annals of linguistics are full of hasty theories rather than built on strong foundation. Studies on the language of the Greeks and the history of the Greeks, he says, must be revisited from the roots. What does revisit mean? Doesn't it mean to visit again? What did we say that غرق? What did we say that the ra in غرق means? Ra, we said, means غياب or disappearance. Ra, what did we say that means? Repetition, again and again, right? repetition. And qa means the core, right? We said غرق. So what is the meaning of revisit? Redo, reread, rewrite. All those re's are repetitions, doing it again and again. It's from the Arabi. Imagine. Okay. So this experience, that's what I believe we should be doing today for our children. We should be teaching them this, showing them the beauty of the Quran, showing them how history and how languages, they are related in many ways, and that actually Arabic is something to be proud of and to learn. So aside from medicine, astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, all of that, we might say that Arabic, even today, infiltrates every Western house, where children unknowingly speak Arabi. Okay, what do? They wake up in the morning and they drink milk. Milk comes from Germanic. And what is the original Germanic word for milk? Look at the etymology. It will say melg, and then in Germanic it is milch. And it later became in German Milch, but it's actually milch. And milk is an Arabic word because it's called in Arabi malikh, and the melch is actually the way you milk a cow. You are doing melch when you milk a cow. So I'm just going to tell you what kids do in the morning. They drink milk, an Arabic word. And in a milkshake, what do? They mix it with banana, for example. So mix is meshaj in Arabic. Yamshaj, amshaj, meshaj, mix. Banana, of course, is Arabic. You know that this is the banana. This is your finger. It's one banana. And this is a banan, and one of them is a banana, which is Arabic. And if they sweeten it with what? With sukkar, with sugar. And then they laugh maybe when they get some milk on their wrist, on their risg, Arabic. And then they lick it, yalaq, laq, lick. And they pretend that it is like candy, al-qand, kandi is Arabic, which their mama had ordered for them from a magazine. A magazine is not about what we call today magazines, but a magazine is a makhzan. It's a store. A magazine, also in other European languages, it still means makhzan, but today it means in English something else. And perhaps they put what's left over of the milk, sweetened with sukkar. They put it in a jar, in a jarra, right? And they do not cover it. They do not yakfuruha, kafara, cover. They do not cover it. But rather, what do? They sit on the sofa, or down, down, on their mattress, matrah, on the earth, earth, and play with their duma, with their dummy, a doll, dumia, duma is a plural. And then they go out, maybe, to the deck, ila deck, where they are merry, where they are merry, yamrahun, marah, merry, marah. So I'm just showing you in this little paragraph here how languages interact and take from each other, and how if we taught our children, just see what words we just have in this little paragraph. Let's just give it a paragraph to our kids, just so they know. Once they get this paragraph, they will read Arabic and English at the same time. Isn't that amazing? They'll know Arabic and English. So languages, they do transform through time. And if we look at any language, any European language, because I'm not familiar with others, but any European language, you will see how much they have transformed through time. So when you look at, let's say, the epic poem describing the adventures of a great Scandinavian warrior, it's an epic poem of the 6th century. It's called Beowulf. In modern English, you'd have to understand it in modern English, because if you look at it in its original English, which is Old English of that time, more than 1,000 years ago, you wouldn't understand anything. You wouldn't understand anything. It's about 1,000 years ago, okay? Not a single word would you understand of this language. Whereas the Quran, which is more than 1,000 years ago, right? More than 1,000 years old, you understand it, you read it. You have lexicons, which are more than 1,000 years old. So, but at that time when Beowulf was written, Old English was similar to other European languages. They were all mutually intelligible in that one tribe in an area could understand another tribe, even although they're speaking different languages. So what happens is that people borrow from each other, populations borrow from each other, and you borrow from your neighboring lands. And sometimes you also get what the language that somebody who made an incursion into your country, that tribe's language also mixes with yours through literature, sciences, or whatever, or just through speech. Anyway, so what happens is that the European languages continued to evolve until the 15th century, and then they became standardized when the printing presses were introduced to Europe. Okay, so when the printing presses were introduced to Europe, that is when the European languages became standardized, because now they were actually putting things in writing, and once it's in writing, it sticks, right? So that's when it started becoming standardized. Now let's look at the Arabic language. So here we're talking about the Arabic language in general, right? The incredible thing is that we can understand what was written in Arabic 5 centuries before Beowulf. So I'm telling you, like Beowulf, you cannot understand a single word of it, and it's in English. It's in Old English. But if you look at the Arabic, you can understand something written 5 centuries before Beowulf, meaning 1,500 years ago. And you can look up the definitions of unfamiliar words. It's amazing. It's amazing. Now, how did Arabic become standardized? Not through printing presses, because we were saying 1,500 years ago, we can understand it today. What made Arabic standardized? Of course, now we have a different Arabic. Now we have Arabic, and I'm talking about Arabi. So now we have 2 levels of Arabic. One is Arabic, and the other is Arabi, which is the Quranic Arabi. But let's talk in general. So what standardized Arabic? Okay. From the earliest time of Quranic revelation, the faithful were reciting the Quran and memorizing it for prayer recitals and for daily guidance. They carved its verses onto pieces of wood, leather, palm fronds, parchment, and their descendants did the same. As Islam rapidly spread, by the year 622, the new religion, this is what is quoted here. It's in the Dictionary of the History of Ideas, okay? In the Dictionary of the History of Ideas, it says, only a century after its inception in Mecca, the new religion dominated an area extending from the Iberian Peninsula in the west to the steppes of Central Asia in the east. So that's by the year 622, as they say. So now when Islam spread into regions of different ethnicities, Arabic naturally intermingled with the local people and local languages. But because Arabic had, at that time, what we call today classical Arabic, because it had been standardized by the Quran, it did not yield to similar transformation. It intermingled, but did not yield to transformation, to similar transformation. And there was a parting of ways as spoken Arabic transformed on its own. So now what the problem is that we have something called spoken Arabic, and that was the one which transformed, but written Arabic and what we call classical Arabic remained the same because it had to remain the same because of the Quran. The Quran had set a standard for Arabic, not just how it's written, but also how it's spoken, the articulation of sounds. Now, anywhere you go around the Muslim world, you will find people reciting the Quran in the same way. We call it tajweed or proficiency. Tajweed means proficiency, making something biljud, bringing out the best in it. It's a timeless voiced technique that applies original emphasis and resonance upon each recited sound as it joins another sound. And that's how you note that also Arabic enunciation was standardized by the Quran, not just the writing, the enunciation. Again, I must point out here, it's not spoken Arabic, which we speak as our dialects. That one did transform, but it could not go very far because the Quran was there. You see what I mean? The Quran was there. It could not go very far. That is why I'm not going to talk about that now, but that is, if I wanted to talk politics, I'll tell you how colonialism tried to remove the Quran from the hands of the people so that they would not retain their language. But I'm not going to talk about politics now. So what happened when finally we have this, we're talking about how Arabic was standardized, but in 932 of the Common Era, the Chinese craft of paper making had arrived at Muslim frontiers in Samarkand, followed by printing. And Muslims began to mass produce and distribute identical texts of the Quran. And that's when its readership expanded. And that is, by some accounts, 500 years before the printing press was first used in Germany. There are excavations found at Al-Fustat in Old Cairo, and archaeologists were able to date those manuscripts to the 10th century. So that was 500 years before the printing press was first used in Germany. Now, of course, the Arabic language had already been standardized, right? In a unique relationship between whom? Between the faithful and the oral Quranic compilation. There was a unique relationship between the faithful and the oral Quranic recitation. That is what standardized the Arabic language. When was that? In 610, when they started memorizing the Quran. So we must acknowledge that the Arab Islamic culture, it's not Arab. The language is Arabic, but the culture is Islamic. And this is what, when we say Arab Islamic, we're not talking about Arabs. This is what I'd like to say to all people who wonder why some people use the word Arab when they talk about the Islamic culture, because it's the Arabi tongue, it's the Arabi language. So it is common knowledge that the Arab Islamic culture had a large hand in delivering what the Renaissance to the rest of Europe, outside the Iberian Peninsula, because the Iberian Peninsula, Al-Andalus, was far ahead of everybody else. The rest of Europe was in the Dark Ages. And although as Muslims, we might take pride in the achievements of our ancestors, it is undeniable that every thinker, every inventor, scientist, or expert in any field at any time would have based their work and derived inspiration from those who came before them, regardless of ethnicity or background. This is something we must really stress on. We should consider humanity one unit. We cannot say that we owe everything to the Arabs, we owe everything to the Muslims, we owe everything to the Greek. We don't say that, because humanity is one unit. And anybody who did any kind of work based it on inspiration from those who came before them. Even now, when we're talking about the Iqra principle, I'm talking about, let's say, finding out this word, what this word means. And Wallahi, may Allah, yani, I'm not taking pride in, let's say, finding out what a word means in myself. I'm not taking pride because it's because of that lexicographer who wrote the meanings of the words that I'm able to do this. There should not be pride in this as much as what? Appreciation, shukr, that you found something, that somebody has done something. Nobody should be proud in the meaning of arrogance, I mean. Maybe happy to achieve something, okay, but even then, you feel gratitude, you feel appreciation for those before you. Humanity is but one unit. And did you know that Sir Isaac Newton, who lived from 1642 to 1726, he said something important. He said, if I have seen further, meaning further than others, it is because I stand on the shoulder of giants. If I have seen further, it is because I stand on the shoulder of giants. Thank God for these giants. We owe these giants that we stand upon their shoulders. If we achieve anything, if we see further, if we are able to find out something, it's because we stand on the shoulder of giants. Now, many thought that the giants upon whose shoulders he said he stood, many thought that he meant the Greeks, while Newton probably did not mean the Greeks. Newton was probably referring to those who had preceded him, all of them, important figures in the Arabi Muslim culture after the earlier Greeks, whose works they translated, built upon, and often eclipsed. Isaac Newton was known to have read their works and been influenced by many, especially Ibn al-Haytham, whose magnum opus, the Book of Optics, Kitab al-Manadir, was in Newton's personal library. Newton's world-famous book, Optics, had a predecessor dating back 700 years. And Newton's name, nobody knows this today, but Newton's name was not on the title page of the first edition. He did not put his name on the title page of the first edition of his book, the Book of Optics. So, it behooves us today, as Newton did, to acknowledge all previous works that make our endeavors even possible. We should highlight the fact that knowledge which spreads far and wide enough to change the world does so on the wings of a common language spoken by humanity. Arabic was the lingua franca for more than 6 centuries, stretching across ethnicities and faiths as the language of theology, philosophy, arts, and science, similar in popularity to English today. Arabic was the language of the world's most famous polymaths of all ethnicities in the medieval era, some of them giants of which Newton spoke. I'm going to name just a few of those Arabic-speaking giants, and be careful. Don't just think their Muslim names means that they're Arabs. Their Muslim names, which I'm going to mention first, are all Muslims with Arabic names, Arabic-sounding names. They're not really Arabic names, they're Arabic-sounding names. And then I'll mention a few non-Muslims with Arabic names. Because Arabs, not all Arabs are Muslims, you know that. Okay, so here we name just a few of those Arabic-speaking giants, not all of whom were Arab. Jabir ibn Hayyan, 722 to 804. He's the father of chemistry. Al-Khwarizmi, 780 to 850. So we're going chronologically, okay? He introduced the world to Arabic numerals. Al-Jahidh, 781 to 869. He wrote about environmental factors influencing organisms to develop new characteristics to survive evolution. He's the biologist who first developed the theories of evolution and introduced the world to concepts like natural selection, the food chain, animal psychology, 1,000 years before Darwin was born. He is Al-Jahid from 781 to 869 when he died. Then you have Al-Kindi, 801 to 873, philosopher and scientist who wrote about metaphysics, ethics, logic, psychology, medicine. You know, they were polymaths. And then you have Ibn Qurra, 826 to 901, mathematician, physician, astronomer, the founder of statics in physics, and the reformer of the Ptolemaic system of cosmology, more than 6 centuries before Copernicus was born. 6 centuries before Copernicus was born. Whom do we know? We know Copernicus. Why? Why? Why are we reading other people's history? Why are we not writing our own history? Al-Battani, he was called the Ptolemy, Batlaymus al-Arab. He was called the Ptolemy of the Arabs. He lived from 852 to 929. He was a mathematician, scientist, astronomer, whose work improved what was known about the length of a year and seasons. Then you have Abu Bakr al-Razi, 865 to 925, alchemist, philosopher, father of pediatrics, obstetrics, ophthalmology, one of the greatest physicians in history, Abu Bakr al-Razi. Centuries before Newton, he made a strong distinction between absolute and relative space. Centuries before Newton. Al-Farabi was a jurist, scientist, philosopher, cosmologist, mathematician, and music theorist. Ibn al-Haytham, 965 to 1040, known as Al-Hazin, astronomer, mathematician. He invented the camera obscura. He's the one we talked about before, whom Newton was influenced by. And Ibn Sina, he was a physician, astronomer, philosopher. He lived from 980 to 1037. And then you have our famous Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, 1058 to 1111. Philosopher, theologian, jurist, logician, ascetic. He combined theology with tasawwuf. He was the first one to do that, arguing against many thinkers of his time in his book, Tahafut al-Falasifa. His book, Ihya Ulum ad-Din, Revival of the Religious Sciences, was considered, and is still considered, the greatest work of Muslim spirituality. Okay, now, many have said, Europeans, what we call Orientalists, have said that it's Abu Hamid al-Ghazali's fault that Muslims, they were hindered. They stepped back and did not evolve in the sciences. But that is not true, because Abu Hamid al-Ghazali from 1058 to 1111, we have many after him still. We're still going chronologically, right? And what he did, he was not against falsafa. He was against certain philosophers. And he called it Tahafut al-Falasifa, meaning incoherence of the philosophers, not incoherence of philosophy. You see the difference? He was against what some philosophers had said. And after him, we have Ibn Zuhr from 1091 to 1161. And he was a physician, surgeon, poet. And then we have Amr al-Khayyam from 1048 to 1131, mathematician, astronomer, also scientific achievements. Then we have Ibn Rushd, 1126 to 1198. So, I mean, that's 100 years later. The father of rationalism. He was a philosopher as well. He authored, now I cannot imagine how they would author that, honestly. I mean, I wrote a book and I'm dead tired. And I have a laptop and I have a search engine. Oh my goodness. And light, electricity. He authored more than 100 books. He commented on Aristotle and Plato's works. He wrote a rebuttal to Al-Ghazali's book, right? He also was the first physician to describe the signs and symptoms of Parkinson's disease. In his medical book, known as Kulliyat, which translated into Latin as the Collegiate and came to be taught in Europe for many centuries. And then you have Nasir ad-Din at-Tusi, philosopher, astronomer. He lived from 1201 to 1274. He is the one who discovered something known as a Tusi couple, the solution for the latitudinal motion of inferior planets. I don't know what that means. I'm just telling you what's written here. And he wrote his book, which is Tahrir al-Majisti in 1247, commentary on the Al-Majest. And it became a very famous book. And he employed a theorem he had invented, which appeared 250 years later. His theorem, which he invented, appeared 250 years later in the work of Copernicus. So everything is owed to whoever came before you. Those famous names you hear of in Europe owe it to the famous names I just mentioned in the Arab Islamic era of scientific knowledge. Then you have Ibn al-Shatir, 1304 to 1375. He actually was the timekeeper of the call to prayer. All he was the timekeeper of the Adhan. He would tell you when the Adhan should be announced in the Umayyad Mosque of Damascus. He constructed a sundial for the minaret there, and it's still there in the Umayyad Mosque. His work, Ibn al-Shatir, marked a turning point in astronomy. Ibn Khaldun, 1332 to 1406, philosopher, social scientist, historian. Subhanallah. So what I'm trying to say is that it's this period of Arab Islamic prominence that much Arabic terminology became firmly entrenched in European languages, far surpassing what little is mentioned in books of etymology related to any European language. By the time Europe rose from its slumber, Islamic universities had already witnessed the graduation of countless European scholars. Having learned their sciences in Arabic, those European scholars returned wearing the gowns and the headdresses of their teachers to spread their knowledge within their European communities. When we realize today the richness of the Islamic library, at the time, we feel saddened by what was lost. So, although it is called Arab Islamic, again, I highlight the fact that it was during this period of enlightenment that Jewish philosophy developed. And it was from this period of enlightenment that the Christian revival emanated. Jewish philosophy, Christian revival would not be there if not for that era of Arab Islamic enlightenment. The greatest Christian philosopher to emerge was Thomas Aquinas. 1225 to 1275, he was called the Doctor of the Church. You can look him up. I'm not going to say much about him. And then we have Raymond Lull. Raymond Lull, 1232 to 1316. He's a Spanish philosopher, theologian, and missionary. He was canonized, made a saint by the Pope. He actually wrote in Arabic. Ramon Lull, Spanish theologian, Christian missionary, wrote his books in Arabic. His most famous book was Kitab al-Ta'ammuli Fillah, book on the contemplation of the God, book on the contemplation of God, and his other book, Kitab al-Mushrik wal-Hukama al-Thalatha, the book on the shirker of God, the mushrik who associates with God, and the three sages, which is commonly known in English as the Book of the Gentile and the Three Wise Men. All these books were written by him in Arabic because Arabic was the lingua franca of the time, which is sadly forgotten by many of us today. That is why, simply because certain Jewish philosophers had Arabic names, Europeans ignored them and did not look at them at all, thinking that they were Muslims. And they were ignored. And now we bring them to light. Here are a few Jewish giants. And we conclude our list with them, with these people, subhanallah. Sa'id ibn Yusuf al-Fayyumi. Sa'id ibn Yusuf al-Fayyumi. He lived from 892 to 942. He was known as Sa'diya Gaon. He was born, of course, in Fayoum, Egypt. He wrote in Arabic, of course. and his philosophy, his books of philosophy, and his influence was greatest upon the Yemeni Jews. And then you have Abu Ayyub Sulaiman ibn Yahya ibn Gabirol. He was born in Andalusia, 1022 to 1070. He was a Jewish philosopher with important works written in Arabic on exegesis, tafsir of his books, philosophy and ethics. And he was a poet with over 100 poems. And he wrote the origin of what is now the Latin famous Fons Vitae. Fons Vitae, he wrote the origin of it, of what is now Latin and famous Fons Vitae. The original, which he wrote in Arabic, was believed to have been lost until Solomon Monk discovered it in 1846. It was written, the original Fons Vitae was written in Arabic by Ibn Gabirol. And he titled it, believe it or not, I mean, you think these are Arabs? I mean, they probably are, but they are Jewish as well. He titled it Yumbu' al-Hayat, the source or spring of life. And then it became, in Latin translation, Fons Vitae. And then the Fons Vitae became famous, and everybody doesn't know about the Arabic Yumbu' al-Hayat, written by Abu Ayyub Sulaiman ibn Yahya ibn Gabirol. And then you have Bahya ibn Yusuf ibn Bakuda, who wrote the first Jewish treatise on ethics, Al-Hidayah ila Fara'id al-Qulub, Guide to the Duties of the Heart. He wrote it in Arabic. He lived from 1050 to 1120. Subhanallah. Another of his works, also in Arabic, was discovered in the French National Library, and it's titled Ma'ani Nafs, the meanings of the self. Ma'ani Nafs. He's Jewish. He wrote in Arabic. And then you have Yehuda ibn Samuel al-Lawi. He was born in Andalusia. He lived from 1075 to 1141. And then you have, of course, very famous Musa ibn Maymun. He's famous. 1135 to 1204, Musa ibn Maymun, better known as Maimonides. He wrote Dalalat al-Ha'irin, the guide for the perplexed. The guide for the perplexed. Dalalat al-Ha'irin in Arabic, among many of his other works. So, to conclude, today it is heartening to see intellectuals studying the Quran and helping us appreciate its wisdom. But regardless, you have to go back to the Arabi. You have to go back to the Quran, which is a source of linguistic pride to us, but it's also of linguistic pride to non-Muslim Arabs. That's what I'm trying to tell you. For example, Amin al-Ma'luf, what did he say? He was born in 1949. He is a prolific author of fiction and nonfiction today. His works have been translated into over 40 languages. He's Lebanese. I mean, he was born and raised in Lebanon. And he sought refuge in France in 1976, and he writes in French these days. Okay, so what does he say? He said, the fact of my simultaneously being Christian and having Arabic as my mother tongue, which is the holy language of Islam, is one of the basic paradoxes that have shaped my identity. Speaking Arabic creates bonds between me and all those who use it every day in their prayers, though most of them, by far, don't know it as well as I do. He speaks Arabic, and most Muslims don't know Arabic, which is true. But he has a bond with the Arabic language. So what non-Arabs may not know is that anyone who claims to have studied the Arabic language through the ages, whether at scholarly gatherings or in universities, anyone with a proper claim to know Arabic would have had to study the Quran. Studying the Quran is part of the syllabus of colleges that teach you Arabic, because you have to know what the Quran is saying in order to be able to consider yourself someone who knows Arabic. During the golden age of Islam, this would have applied to every philosopher, scientist, thinker, in short, anyone who partook of knowledge from its sources. You will be surprised to read what somebody said, the Bishop Alvarez Paulus of Cordoba, because we say that now. What he is saying, we say, but look at what he says. He died in 861. 861. What does he say? Alas, all talented young Christians read and study with enthusiasm the Arab books. They gather immense libraries at great financial expense. They despise the Christian literature as unworthy of attention. They have forgotten their language. For everyone who can write a letter in Latin to a friend, there are 1,000 who can express themselves in Arabic with elegance. He is crying over the fact that nobody is interested in their own language anymore. Everybody is interested in writing in Arabic. Arabic is the language of elegance, the language of science, the language of literature, the language of love. They write their letters in Arabic. For everyone, he says, who can write a letter in Latin to a friend, there are 1,000 who can express themselves in Arabic with elegance. Today, we say the same thing in the opposite way. For any person who can write a letter in Arabic to a friend, there are 1,000 who can express themselves. We're talking about Arabs even. There are 1,000 young Arabs who can express themselves in English with elegance rather than in Arabic. And that is so sad. So what I would like to say is young people learn quickly, which is where we come in, our generation. Let us conclude by encouraging one another in the now, rather than simply yearning for a glorious past, which is not ours. Let us encourage each other in the now to empower Muslim youth with the self-confidence of the history, of the language, of the faith, of the Quran, their noble heritage, so that they might experience the life-changing power of the Arabi Quran, what it does to change their lives for the better, inshallah. Let us overcome our short-sightedness and help them become the magnanimous persons they can be. Let us put the Quran's wisdom into practice and help to bring peace and prosperity as we change the world for the better. Humanity is but one unit. It is our turn now to help our young realize that, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين